To the purpose, I'm not at all in search of consensus today. In fact, very much to the contrary, and I can't imagine how I'm going to be able to use up 14 minutes in demolishing intelligent design, as I decline to call it, since it's a propaganda term for creationism. But I'll see if I can waste 14 minutes. I have a third challenge, which is to those who say the president is one of them, that in these matters that can't yet quite be decided, of where we come from, our cosmos, our species, we should teach the argument. We should have equal time. The president is too stupid to know that there isn't really an argument about this anymore. There used to be one. And when there was, when people weren't quite certain, the line of the churches was that the teaching of evolution and of Darwinism should be banned altogether. They didn't want equal time then. Notice the slippage of their gears. When they were strong enough to try and ban it, that's what they wanted to do. Now they're not strong enough. They come up with a weedy, feeble, ingratiating whine of, well, equal time, fair dues, open-mindedness, and so on, as if there really was a disagreement about this. All right. Let's see if we can accommodate them. I learned about Darwin by studying, actually, the debate between Bishop Huxley and, Bishop Wilberforce and Thomas Huxley at Oxford. I mean, that is a classic debate. That's how I learned about it. I wasn't taught it in science class. I was taught it in history class. That's how I learned. I've learned since, as you have, about the debate between Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, the idol of all morondom, as H.L. Mencken called him, in Dayton, Tennessee. I learned about that in history and literature class, not in biology class. Keep it out of there, because otherwise we'll be having people saying, well, children, chemistry period is over, but we'll be doing alchemy in the next half. And put away your astronomy books and get out your astrology charts, because we are open-minded in this school, and other stultifying nonsense that you wouldn't even get in a madrasa, I shouldn't think. But if we're to accept the principle, then let us say to the president and his friends, by all means, equal time. Any church that is tax exempt, therefore, any religious group that gets a break from the IRS, any church that's in receipt of any monies at all from the so-called faith-based initiative must give 50% of its time to the teaching of evolution by natural selection. You might take that back to your communities and tell them to suck on that and see if they like it. Because that's what they seem to be asking, but are too stupid to realize. You see, off the defensive again, we're not resisting them. We're on their trail now. We've got their number. We're on their track. They're the ones who should be scared of us. Don't you think it's about time? I do. Any of us here today are much luckier in the aggregate than would have been any comparably randomly selected group of people born 500 years ago, whose life expectancy would have been perhaps 30, and whose infant mortality rate would have been something ghastly to behold. Or if we were born in today's Congo or Darfur. However, from the observation of exactly precisely the same facts, and the same phenomena, and the same processes, it's always been possible to draw two kinds of conclusion, and it always will be possible to draw two kinds of conclusion. The first is to say that no great decider exists. There isn't a decider who awarded me the right to live while another baby 2 miles or 2,000 miles away barely lived long enough to cry before dying of diarrhea. I don't credit or blame God for these things occurring. That earthquakes and tycoons probably occur. That's what's called by some a Freudian slit. That earthquakes and hurricanes and typhoons and so forth occur not because of the will of divine punishment or divine judgment or divine verdict, but because we live on a climatically volatile planet with a cooling crust which has quite deep faults in some parts of it, including locally. That would be a better explanation, but it doesn't convince everybody. The laws of nature are never suspended. Albert Einstein said that's the miraculous, the only miraculous thing about them, that they never change, that they're completely regular. And they certainly are not suspended in response to prayer or in response to ritual sacrifices, and so forth. The positions I've just given you are my own positions, my own views. I didn't think them up all by myself, but I agree with them. Here's what I've learned. I've learned not to say some things that used to irritate me. I don't say, for example, why do they never come up with any new arguments? As I heard myself saying after a debate with a theologian the other night in Georgetown. Well, they can't come up with any new arguments, can they? They're stuck, if you like, with the old arguments. They can say, if you like, and by torturing themselves into pretzel shape, all right, this applies only to those who do accept the theory of evolution by natural selection, or who do understand a little bit of physics. They say, come to think of it, it does look as if we got here as primates after 99.8% of all the other species ever created on Earth became extinct. That only shows how clever God was to begin with. It's not much of an argument, is it? Actually, it doesn't really count as an argument at all. It isn't reasoning of any kind. It's a sort of reverse engineering. But it is, as is often said of hypocrisy, the compliment that vice pays to virtue. It's a tribute, in a sense, to the work that, had it been done earlier, would have meant there was no need for superstition in the first place. The same with the Big Bang. After all, it's an awesome cosmic event involving a great deal of heat and a great deal of light. In fact, Dinesh D'Souza, one of my best antagonists, a really believing, serious Catholic, does say in his new book, What's So Great About Christianity, a book that needs a question mark in its title but doesn't have one, that, come to think of it, now we look at it again, Genesis, instead of negating the Big Bang, predicts it, because we used to laugh and say, how could God create light and only then the sun, the moon, and the stars? Well, the Big Bang answers that. So you see, it was always there all along, only we were too dumb to see it. Now, I agree with Dinesh that that's a nice try. But that's as generous as I'm prepared to be. And then 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, heaven decides we can't let them go on like this. We need an intervention. Probably the best place for it would be in Bronze Age Palestine or Egypt. Probably the best form it could take would be a human sacrifice. That might cheer them up a bit. Now, if you don't believe this, you do not believe in any of the three monotheistic revelations. That's what you have to believe. That's the minimum you must believe in order to believe in any of those aforesaid. And of course, it's not believable, or, shall I put it like this, it only replaces the argument as before. It replaces the argument as it was before we knew about Cro-Magnons, or dinosaurs, or Neanderthals. It argues from design. And if everything was designed, what are we to make of the designer, who sentenced so many generations to barbarism, misery, ignorance, slavery, and early death? In the first place, isn't that rather an incompetent, rather tinkering designer, to say the very least of it? In the second place, isn't it a rather cruel, or at the very best, a highly indifferent one? And we still can't be sure whether this same incompetent and indifferent and cruel person cares whether we go to bed with members of our own gender or not, because there's no way to derive verdicts like this from evidence like that. So the religious still haven't scored the ghost of a point. Now, who wants this to be true? Who but someone servile and stupid and pathetic wants it to be true that they can be convicted of thought crime at any minute of their day or night as they're sleeping for thinking the wrong thing? Who wants to be always in debt to someone who never asked them if they wanted the loan in the first place? Who wants this? All of us who, as Americans, oppose the very idea of unfreedom and tyranny must say that this is where the resistance to totalitarianism really begins, by the repudiation of religion and by the defiance of theocracy. And that's where the battle for our values has to start. What kind of designer, what kind of caprice, what kind of incompetence, what kind of cruelty, what kind of nihilism, what kind of commitment to nothingness, and in the meantime, in the little suburb where we dwell, every other rock in our solar system is inhospitable to life as being too hot or too cold. as is large tract too hot, too cold of our own planet, which is on a climatic and ecological knife edge, as we have good and better and more recent reason to know, and that it is as likely that we'll be able to get out of the way of this and move elsewhere in response to the climate crisis as it is in response to the Andromeda crisis, and that those who try and teach you differently are asking you not to use your intellectual or analytical capacities at all, but to do something very old, very backward, like the Aztecs, like the pre-Galileo, stupefied human beings who didn't know the microorganisms were there, who didn't know about the Big Bang, who didn't know about the red light, and simply to place everything you have on a leap of faith. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, don't do it. You know better. Everybody now knows better. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.